Hello, listeners, and welcome to the third and final part of this mini-series on the Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm your speaker, Casey, and in part one, Daniel and I discussed how Daniel became a part of the organisation. And in part two, we looked at the consequences of being shunned. And in this part, we focus on rebuilding an entire life outside of the group. For early access to full-length ad-free content, please visit patreon.com/the Cult Vault and sign up for as little as £1 a month. But for now, here is Daniel. I can't even begin to understand how difficult these things must be for you to talk about, to relive, and also to just speak through, because they aren't things that have happened, they are things that are happening. And I'm really grateful that you're willing to speak to us about these things that are so difficult, because I think it will really drive home to the listeners just how serious this policy is and how much it affects every single person involved. Because you don't get to be a part of your children's lives, but they don't get to be a part of your life either. This beautiful life that you've created with your wife who you love. Heard you both speaking to each other before she left, and they also don't get to be a part of that, and that's really sad as well.
It is.
There's both sides, isn't there?
Well, there is, and it's so unnecessary. It is so unnecessary, but it's they're the ones in control of that. Again, control. There's this unhealthy need for control, and trying to control other people, which is an impossible thing. You can't control. It's hard enough to control yourself. You can't control another person. But and one of the things that, and I talk about this a lot with my other friends who are ex-witnesses, whether they're the younger ones or the ones who are my age, is that because of the organization shunning policy, they make the decision to end the relationship, but then they act like the victims. And they're the ones who cause it. Well, you did this. That's why we have to shun you. It's like, do you realize what you sound? My father is a very abusive man. When I was a kid, he would say things like, "Why did you make me hit you?" It's the same damn thing. Why did you do that? Now we have to shun you. It's like, that's fucked up.
And the reaction that you got from your eldest son when you were on his doorstep
Yeah.
only adds to the question of what tales do they spin inside the congregation for your son to give you that reaction, because you're not going to him saying, forgive me for murdering somebody, forgive me for all of these horrible things that I've done that break the law. You're going to him saying, can we have a relationship? No, it's not as simple as no, because you don't believe in Jehovah anymore. It's all of these horrible titles and descriptions, and false presentations of individuals that they give from the pulpit, for lack of a better word.
Right. Right. Yeah, they wouldn't use the word pulpit, but it's the same thing.
You are finishing up here today, and you're going to your local dojo down the road,
That's right.
and that is significant in itself. And you gave your wife a big kiss goodbye before she left the house for the day. So there are things to speak about that are on the flip side of this really difficult situation that you are experiencing every day.
Well, that's right, and it's important to emphasize that, because especially this last little segment here is powerfully emotional, but it can seem like a real downer, because it is. But overall, my life is really good now, and I wish my children were part of it. It's like, so some of the things they complained about, some of the things I was as a father when they were little, was because I was trying to be a good witness father and strict according to their rules. It's like, you don't even know me anymore. If you knew me, I think you would find that you would love me, and we could have a great relationship, and that accepting you for who you are. One of the kind of little things that, well, it's not a little thing, it's a big thing. So after you leave a cult, most of us have nobody. You've lost everybody. So maybe reconnecting with family members that we've ended relationships with, or making new friends. One of the things that I've come to appreciate is that now in the relationships we will have relationships with people who love us for who we are and not what we pretended to be or what we pretended to believe. And I just think that is so important. It's because, when you're in the cult, especially if you're really in the cult, you're not yourself. And well, maybe you don't know, but witnesses call each other brother and sister. But if you have a relationship that if someone can announce so and so was no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and suddenly no one will talk to you anymore, that was not really your brother or your sister, right? If it's conditional, it ain't love, right? It just isn't. And so, again, to build relationships where people love you for who you are, warts and wrinkles and all, and not what we pretend to be, or who we pretend to be, or what we pretend to believe. That's a real, authentic relationship. Another friend of mine used to like to say, I keep my circle small. Well, so when I was a witness, it's like, oh, I'm part of an organization of 7 or 8 million people, and we're all brothers and sisters, an international brotherhood. That's how I got hooked. I'm not part of an international brotherhood anymore, but the small circle of friends I have are real, and it's beautiful.
And you teach history now, and something that we were talking about before we hit the record button, and something that I know is a passion of yours from following you on Twitter and watching your panel at ICSA around education and the importance of education,
Right.
was really how you engage in critical thinking with your students and how you encourage them to pursue individual thought. And I am a really strong believer in facilitation over teaching. And the quote that you said earlier on,
Right.
teach children how to think, not what to think. I think that is a true reflection of what facilitation can do for young minds.
Right. Well, and I share that quote with all of my students frequently. And sometimes they'll ask me, we'll be talking about a particular situation, especially with my 11th graders who were in the US history class. And they might ask me, well, what do you think, Mr. O'Brien, about this or that? And I'll say, great question. I don't mind you asking me, but I don't want to bias you. So I'm not going to tell you right now. Trust me, I have opinions on this. And I'll remind them of that quote. And I said, my job is to not bias you. It's not to teach you what to think, but to teach you how to think. So let's look at the different sides. Let's try and understand the positions of, and it's usually not just side A or B, black and white, red or blue. Here in the United States, Republican or Democrat. It's a lot of different things, and it's important to learn to lean into that and understand the subtleties of the argument and the complexities, and that it's not easy. A big thing here recently has been women's reproductive rights and abortion rights, and Roe v. Wade has been overturned. And there's a very polarized, very simplistic propaganda slogans, pro-life, pro-choice. And it doesn't take long to realize that there are a lot of complicated situations that can prove easily that just having a one-size-fits-all answer does not fit anybody, right? So, for instance, ectopic pregnancies is just one example, a rape or incest. And so I have my students look at those things and try and understand that it's not so easy or so clear-cut. And they frequently, after researching it and talking about it, they come away saying, I don't know, this is difficult. Yes, exactly. That is the answer. And what you believe is for you, right? One of the things I'll ask them about that too. What do you think about someone deciding that, say, for instance, we're talking about abortion now. What do you think if someone says, I don't think abortion is right, I'm not going to do that? Oh, great. Well, what if somebody tells you that you have to believe what they believe? They're like, that's not cool. Or what if someone says, I don't think we should read this book because it's got the N word in it? Well, if they don't want to read it, they shouldn't read it. But what if somebody tells you, you can't read that book because it's got the N word in it? They're like, oh, that's not okay. Even if they don't want to read it. Like nobody should tell me. And so these are little exercises in how to think critically about things, how to see the complexity about things, and how to recognize when people are trying to be controlling inappropriately.
I really love the way that you've been able to position that, because as we were talking about before we hit the record button, you talk a lot about the not the United States of America, but the divided states of America. And yeah,
Right
as you
now,
said,
that's
the red and blue, pro guns, anti guns. But it's not as simple as saying we should all have guns or none of us should have guns, because then people will say, well, what about if you bring a gun to a knife fight? What if you're the guy with the knife? And there are all these, as you said, complexities that go into protecting your family if an intruder comes onto your property and they have a gun and you don't. But then what about if your children get hold of those firearms? And all of the classic arguments that go into those things that aren't as simple. And that's why it's dangerous to either fully buy into the left or fully buy into the right. Because if you can say, well, I believe most of what the left says or most of what the right says, there's a few things that I don't agree with, but I have to buy into one or the other, then you're foregoing those things that you disagree with in order to fully belong to something. And I am of the mindset that we don't have to fully belong to anything other than ourselves.
That's right. If you have yourself, I've come to appreciate that the most important relationship we can have in life is the one we have with ourselves. Following up on what you just said, there are countless polls that show the vast majority of Americans don't agree with everything on the right or the left. And so we have a very tiny minority of people trying to dictate what 330 million people should think or believe or do. And most of us don't want that. So the whole question is really a democracy is open for debate too, and we talk about that. Most of my students are surprised to find out that in fact the United States of America is not a democracy. It's a republic, a representative form, and when they lean into that, that's shocking to them as well. But I've always heard it's a democracy. Well, it's democratic in form, but this isn't ancient Athens anymore, right?
No,
We don't have
no.
10,000 people.
And the one thing that I wanted to finish on today, just before we wrap up, is for you to talk us through your dojo and your experiences being involved in the martial arts, because that's something that's been quite impactful for you before and after your tenure within the organization.
Sure. Well, I practiced judo for a few years as a teenager, and then for a variety of reasons, I just quit. I guess I lost interest. I probably would have picked it up again in my 20s, but of course, witnesses aren't allowed to do that. Like witnesses aren't allowed to do a whole lot of things. So after I left the religion and I had more time on my hands, uh, one day I was out for a walk in the local neighborhood, and there's a dojo that's a brisk 4-minute walk away. And I walked in and I saw what they were doing, and I asked if I could observe, and they were training, and they said sure. And I thought this looks interesting. The particular art is it's got a long name, Bujinkan. It's Budo Taijutsu. Most people would call it ninjutsu, but that has all sorts of weird, incorrect Hollywood images of the Hollywood ninja. But it's got aspects of what most people would consider to be jujitsu. You have unarmed and weapons training. We train hand-to-hand combat, throws, using weapons, knives, swords, spears, chains, all sorts of fun things. Ancient samurais didn't have guns, so we don't train with that. I'm not against guns. I'm a gun owner. I think we should have common sense gun laws, but that's another question. You asked me to focus on this. So one initial appeal was that I was forbidden for doing this for a long time. It's like, well, so I'm going to try this again and see if I can. When I started training, I was in my late 50s, and I was pleased to see that I could still do that. I mean, I'm not 20 anymore, but I can still do a cartwheel, and that's pretty damn cool. And just facing your fears about things. One of the things we do is a sword evasion thing. And so you'll stand there and someone will come at you with a sword and, try and kill you. And your job is to just step out of the way. That's all. Just step out of the way. And we don't do this very often, but it's a training technique every once in a while. And I remember explaining it to one of my colleagues at school. He's like, well, that's very practical, sarcastically, obviously. And I said, well, the chances of me being attacked by a sword are pretty small, but someone might come at you with a tire iron or a baseball bat or a stick or whatever. But the idea is when they come at you, you don't run in abject fear, which, running away is not necessarily a bad thing if you can live for another day. But you control your fear. You don't run away, but you also don't stand there and get hit. And if you can just move just enough to get out of the way and control your emotions and control your body, then you're ready to go on to the next level of some trainings. And so when I started training this, I did not know how much it would help me with another real life tragedy. So 2 years ago, about a week ago, my wife felt a lump under her breast, and she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And 2 years ago in December, she had a double mastectomy. And so that was obviously very difficult for both of us. She was the one undergoing the actual cancer treatments, and she had 3 months of chemo and a year of immunotherapy, and I don't even know how many surgical procedures besides the initial one and reconstructive surgery. I've lost track. But sometimes I think it would have been easier if I was the one with the cancer. To be supportive and loving for your spouse when they're going through such a difficult thing. Facing down that sword is a piece of cake. Not letting your fears overwhelm you. To be able to be out of the way so you don't get hurt, but to not run away, to be there and to fight. Well, that was very practical to deal with life's challenges. So, and all of us are going to face stuff like this. Every one of us. There's no getting away from it. It's part of being human. It really is.
So your dojo that's just a stone's throw away, you have a community there. You're part of something that you get to attend on a regular basis. If you were to not go today, would there be any repercussions or consequences?
Would I be shunned? No. Right. It's in fact, I was a little worried about that. There's been a few things that, people over the years since I've left the cult have said, hey, why don't you check this out or do that? And I've been sort of gun shy, as the expression goes. And so when I first started doing this, it's like, is this going to be all culty and stuff? And at the beginning of everything, the main sensei, he says a prayer in Japanese, and there is a kamidana, which is sort of a shrine. But he tells everybody, you can do this if you want or not. And so we've had some people who just sit and they don't. But I don't mind participating in that. For me, it has no particular religious significance. It's just, we're starting this, we're doing something together, and then we train together. And there's a lot of respect. This particular dojo tends to attract a different kind of people. It's something about this art. It's not to diss other martial arts, but a lot of martial arts are more sports. This is actually serious combat training. And a lot of the things we do, you have to really trust the person you're training with, because if you did it fast, if you did it hard, if you some techniques we can't complete, because if you did, you would seriously injure, maybe even kill the other person. So we do a lot of things relatively slowly, or we do the technique up to a point where we start. And so, but it has to be real enough that you can get a sense of what it could be like. Otherwise, it's just cosplay. And so it's this fine line that in and of itself is very interesting, right? Can I do this joint lock on you, or can you do it on me, where you get a sense if you were in a real life or death situation, what you would need to do to protect yourself. Can I give you enough resistance that I don't just fall over limp for you and make you look like some Zen master, right? But can I also not make it so difficult that you can't even do it? And that's a two-way thing, and that takes time to develop trust with your partner, right? You know, I could let you do things to my body where you could seriously hurt me, right? We get thrown a lot. A couple of weeks ago, I got thrown about 30 times. A lot of time on the mat. Not bad for an old guy, huh?
And
Later
it's
on,
kind of like it's
videos.
it's a big FU to the group that you've left as well, as we were talking about before we hit record, in regards to being a pacifist group.
Yeah.
I mean, after this conversation, I'm not sure you really can use that word in the real, genuine sense of the term pacifist.
No.
But you couldn't do that. You did it, and then you couldn't do it, and now you're back at it. You're enjoying it. You're going to go there right after this talk, which might be a great emotional outlet after some of the subject
No.
matter that we've spoken about.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I just had a quick look here. It's a Cleroterian, which was a device used by ancient
Convenience.
Athenians. This Cleroterian was a device used by ancient Athenians during their period of democracy over 2,500 years ago to randomly select citizens for state councils, offices, and court juries,
Oh,
because power corrupts. And I think that's great.
that does. You'll have to send that to me, because when we're studying about the U.S. Constitution, one of the units is I have my students examine ancient Athenian democracy, and then I ask them, was it a real democracy, yes or no? Because if you were a woman or a slave in Athens, you couldn't vote. And then I have them compare it to the situation in the United States in 1791 when the Bill of Rights was ratified. It's like, okay, is the United States a real democracy? They're like, well, no, I guess, because slaves and women couldn't vote. Slaves got the right to vote long before women did in this country.
I want to
So
take one of your history classes. This sounds like the sort of thing that I would love to sit and ponder for a long
yeah.
time. Wow, brilliant. Thank you so much, Daniel, for your conversation. Oh, also, I was supposed to ask you, I called you Dan on Twitter once and you told me off and you said that you go by Daniel, and one day you'll tell me why.
I didn't mean to tell you off. I don't know why I don't really like that form of my name. I either Daniel or Danny. My grandmother called me Dan, and I didn't mind that, but for some reason she got a pass. But yes, I prefer Danny or Daniel.
I think when it comes to grandmas, they get away with more than anyone. And
Correct.
rightly so.
But don't worry,
Well,
if you call me Dan, I won't shun you.
oh yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. So we've spoken about some interesting things today. We've spoken about somebody that joined the Jehovah's Witnesses in their 20s, as opposed to somebody that was born and raised in the group. We've
Right.
spoken about how you quickly rose to the ranks of the position of elder within the organization, and then also how you left the religion at the expense of losing communication with your sons. And I think that that just goes to show anybody that joins a high demand religious group at any point in their life really runs the risk of great sacrifice if they decide to leave. And that's the biggest takeaway, I think, from this whole conversation is you could be born into a group like this, or you could join in your 20s, and what you risk to lose if you decide to turn your back against the control is some of the things that we've covered today. And I see how hard it is for you to talk about these things, Daniel, and I truly appreciate you willing to come here today and talk about these things and be open about them and have a conversation that is so difficult and puts you in such a vulnerable place, and allowing the listeners some insight into where you are personally, and also just to talk about your wife and your dojo and the things and your education and your going off to university and striving to have those things in life that you wanted that you couldn't when you were a part of the organization. And I think that that's also an important takeaway as well. So thank you so much for your time, Daniel. I really, really do appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on your show. I can't wait to hear it when it finally goes live. So I am curious, what sort of mechanisms do you have for feedback or anything like that from listeners afterwards?
Yeah, people often leave comments on the YouTube channel. People send emails, people will write things on Twitter and Instagram about things. And I love sending feedback from the listeners to the guests that have been in the interviews. So if anybody has any questions for Daniel, if anybody would like to leave their feedback or comments, then I will pass them on. And Daniel is on Twitter as well, so you can find him on there, where we often have some discussions drawing parallels between one high demand religious group to the next, and they're always really interesting discussions to have as well. And Daniel's also written a couple of things, an essay that I found particularly interesting. Are religious people happy? I thought was a really is that the full title of the essay?
Yeah, are religious people happier? It started when I was a witness. One time I went to a doctor's office for some minor thing, and there was I think it was the New Yorker magazine, I'm not sure. And on the cover of the magazine, it said people who were religious tended to have better results with illnesses. And, we talked earlier about cognitive dissonance. I'm thinking, well, that shouldn't be true because only Jehovah's Witnesses have the true religion. All those other religions are false. How could people who have false beliefs have a better medical result when they believe something that wasn't true? That really bothered me. I shoved it down. And then, of course, when I left the religion, it's like, it was still an interesting question to me, but I no longer had the idea that only witnesses had the truth, and so I leaned into that. And the title is legit, but it's a little misleading. And if you want to share that with any of your listeners, I'd be happy to have them read it. But really, the question is pursuing spirituality, whatever that means to you, without the confines of a religion. Spiritual but not religious. It's its own group. So
Yeah. And I found that part of the essay sort of halfway through.
yeah.
After unpacking the title, it was kind of religion and spirituality, they're not the same thing, and let's talk about that. So if anybody would like to read that, I do have a copy, and Daniel of course can also send listeners a copy of that essay as well. How do you sign off at your dojo? Is there like an official thing that you all do to like end the session?
Yeah. Right. So after the prayer, it's all Shiken Haramitsu Daikomyo. And then we bow to each other and say Domo arigato gozaimasu, which basically is Japanese for thank you very much.
Okay, I can say arigato. That there we go. We do this.
Domo,
Arigato. There we go.
domo arigato.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Enjoy your session at the dojo, and I'll speak to you soon.
I will. I look forward to that. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye. That is the end of this week's mini-series on the Jehovah's Witnesses. To get in touch, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.